So hi everyone, welcome to my shed. Today we're going to start the disassembly of this beastie here. This is a Honda CBX Super Sport from 1979. I purchased this bike back in March last year, I think it was 2019. I bought from a guy who was riding on the freeway and it went bang. And it threw a conrod out the front of the engine. So that's the state I bought the bike in. It is a bit rough, but it is a genuine original CBX. My plan with this bike is to pull the engine, strip the engine of the useful parts, and use one of my other engines to bring this bike and put it back on the road. This bike here is just going to end up with a bit of TLC, some detailing, but it's going to be my daily ride for 2020. So I look forward to sharing my experiences on this bike when I get up and running. If I get it up and running, I hope it doesn't all end up in the parts bin. But anyway, there we go. So just watch this space and I'll be back with you shortly. Right, so now we're going to move on to the first step of the breakdown, which really is talking about the tools I use and the storage, all fairly simple. But for those of you that work with Hondas predominantly, you'll know that the tools required are fairly straightforward. They're actually, most of them are in the Honda toolkit, but they're not really man enough to do the job of the strip down, but basically they're the same. So here we go. So here we have basically the majority of what's required to pull CBX apart. So we have 8mm, 10mm, 12mm, 14mm and 17mm. And what I use are these T-bars. So I've got 8, 10, 12, 14 and 17. And it really does facilitate for quick pulling apart and reassembling of bikes. And I would thoroughly recommend, if you haven't got some, you get some. So that's that really in terms of the tooling. In terms of storage, I've got these big bins that I use here. These are Addis ones that I actually use for bringing a lot of my parts back in containers, in shipping containers. So I just stack those up nicely on pallets and they can just be pulled off. So I use those. When I break the bike down, you can take all of the parts and you can drop them in here. All of the smaller items I then put down into containers of this size. So these are all the nuts, bolts, all these sort of ancillaries that are small enough to fit in there. But the side panels and the bigger items end up going in the bigger box. And cables, oil coolers all end up going in the bigger box. So that's about it really. And then once the engine's dropped out, then obviously that gets stored in a separate container. So now we'll start moving on to the next phase of starting to pull this bike apart. So here we go then. I've got the time-lapse camera running, so when I'm not recording, you're going to see the time-lapse video. So first thing I do is take the seat off, tank, and we'll really go from that point onwards. So to release the tank, there's a clip at the back here. Find the blessed thing. There we go. 2 clips each side. That comes off. There's one bolt under here holding the tank. So just going to get a bar and 12mm. What we're doing is removing these bars, okay? So the CBX engine is held with 2 bolts here, okay? It's held with 2 brackets here, okay? And there's 2 bolts that are off 2 hanging brackets here. So basically to drop the engine, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 bolts. And then obviously you've got to remove the exhaust and you've got to remove the chain on the sprocket, otherwise you'll stretch it. And what we will do is drop it on this single bolt here on a jack. Okay, so we've now got to a point where the exhaust is off, the bolt's off the bottom, and so we're going to now move towards removing the brackets that support the engine and the oil cooler. But before I do that, I'm going to put a supporting block under the oil filter with a hydraulic jack. That'll support the engine whilst it's being pulled apart from the frame, and then when we come to drop the engine, we can drop it down on the floor with that jack. So, as I say, this will just support the engine whilst we go through this process. So just take a little bit of weight on there. It takes the weight off the engine and allows us to remove the bolts that are holding the oil cooler and top brackets on. Okay, so one of the things I've got to do now is drain the oil. When I drain oil on bikes, I use a bundled tray. So I've got one tray and a tray, because many years of experience has taught me that this is the way to do it. It's taken me a long time, but actually now it avoids getting oil on the floor. So now, thank goodness, after how many years, I don't get oil on the floor because I take a bundled approach. But of course, there's always the first time to change that rule. But anyway, let's get this oil out. Okay, so here we go. So now I've removed this sprocket cover here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the chain sprocket, and to do that I'm going to use an impact wrench, which is a lot easier. And you can see that just flies off. That'll take 2 seconds. So that's it. That's the chain removed. And so now we can just hopefully pull that off if it's not too tight, hopefully we'll just be able to pull that off. Now I need 2 hands to do that, so I'll be right back with you. Right, so there we go. The sprocket's off now. So when we drop that engine, it's not going to get tight on that chain. The engine will drop down. But so really all that's holding it now is two bolts there and the 2 bolts at the top. Now we will just remove other items such as the clutch cable beforehand, but then this engine should drop down. As we can see, this bike is I think it's a bit of what I would call a rough survivor. It's obviously had years of pretty much of abuse, but let's not let that stop us from turning this bike into something that will become a nice bike that can be used day to day. Not going to be perfect, it's going to be a daily rider, and that's the way I want it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start removing the clutch cable, and I'll come back to you shortly. Cheers. Okay, so we're getting fairly close now to be able to drop this engine out of this particular bike. Last thing to do now is we're going to remove the gear lever. We're going to remove these top brackets here, and this last big bolt here on the back of the engine. The weight will then be supported on the jack, and then hopefully it should just drop down on its own. So let me just remove the gear lever a sec. Right, so we're getting close. So one gear lever removed, I'm just going to put the bolts back in it. So that doesn't get lost. I can go in the ancillary. So now, we've basically got to remove these top brackets. I've just checked that the jack's taken the weight. One thing you mustn't forget to do is remove the HT leads, which is a simple mistake to make. So whilst we're at it, we'll just do that now. So that's all the HT leads removed. So if I've remembered this correctly, all we've got to do now is remove this top bolt, which, if it's off the jack, it should be pretty free, which it is. So for speed of the film, I'm just going to use an impact wrench on there to undo this nut. And as we can see, the weight's being taken on there, so I can pull this bolt out by hand. He says, with a wry smile. Okay. And I'm just going to pull the spacer out that goes on this as well. So there's a spacer on the inside. That's going to go in there. Now, if all my memory serves me correctly, this engine should start dropping down. So let's give it a go. And there she goes. So I'm just going to drop her down a bit. I'm going to stop her there. So I need to remove these throttle cables. Okay, so I've partially removed the cables now. As we can see, there's the choke cable in here. Now this choke cable goes into a slot on the side there, and I've just pulled that out, and that's that removed. It's held on a clamp there, so that's where it's clamped on. You've got two throttle cables on a CBX. You've got a push and a pull, and so what you've got to do is release those, which is a fairly simple exercise, as long as you can get to them down here. Trying to do it with one hand isn't exactly the easiest thing to do, but in essence what you've got to do is this back. So let's move the choke cable out for a sec. I'm trying to do this one-handed, which isn't ever the easiest of tasks to do, but pull the throttle cable down and push it forward, and it should unclip. But with this bike, who knows? There you go. I've just heard it come out now. There you go. So that's come out now. It's been pushed. Okay, I'm back. Had a few difficulties getting that throttle cable out. The last one sometimes happens. This was the throttle cable was a bit kinked. It's an old bike, and in the end I had to drop the carbs off to release it. But the carbs are off now over there on the bench. We're moving one step forward. A couple of little more things we've got to do. One thing we've got to do is release the oil cooler, which is under this cover here. Okay, and the other side is under there. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the oil cooler, and then we're ready to move to the next stage. Again, you just need to put a tray underneath to catch any oil falling out. And I'm going to be back with you. And so a couple of other points of note before you drop the engine. Remove the tacho cable, and I'm going to start unplugging these now. Actually, the electricals off the engine. But apart from that, we should be ready to go. So I'll catch up with you in a bit. Okay, so now the oil cooler pipes have been removed there and around here, as you can see. So those have been removed. This one I've tucked up under there. So everything's been removed. The wiring's been removed, all the cables removed, tacho cable removed. So this engine's ready to drop. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I've never dropped a CBX motor on my own. I've always had another pair of hands. Normal practice is to drop the front down, pull the top bolt here, drop the front down on the jack. One person will sit on the bike and let the front down, and then the other one takes the weight on the rear and moves the frame away until it's on the floor. Now I haven't got any help, so I'm doing this on my own. I think I've devised a way, so it'll be interesting to see how this goes and see whether it goes without issue. So I'll put the record on, and hopefully you're going to see this go as it happens. So let me just stop the camera. I'm going to put the forward-facing camera on, and then we're coming back. Okay, so here we go. So I've got my trusty dolly that I'm going to be using to put under the engine. Okay, as I drop it down. But to achieve that, I've got to remove the jack underneath here. Okay, let me just move this camera down a bit so you can see what's going on. And then hopefully that'll be good. Yeah, so you can see the jack now. So we're going to let the jack down, take the weight on the straps here and get the dolly underneath and just hopefully drop it onto the dolly. So let's see how we get on. So I've got a piece of wood here just in case I need it. So the first thing is obviously we've got to remove this top bolt, which you can see just slides out like that when you've got the weight of the engine taken on the jack. So the plan now is to drop this down and take the weight. Now this strap is strapped underneath the oil filter, so it's not going anywhere. So let's see how we get on. And the object is for the straps to take the weight so I can get the jack out from underneath. So that weight now is taking on the strap. So I'm taking the jack out. Plugs in the way. So the plan is to drop this down onto the dolly if I can, without issue. But to achieve that, I've got to take the weight off this strap. So normally you can take the weight and pivot this motor yourself. So I'm going to drop the strap down out and hopefully she's going to go. I think now she's on the dolly, hopefully. Yeah, perfectly on the dolly. So that's that now. Now I'm going to leave this strap in place just to as a safety measure. And then what we'll do is we'll drop the rear of the engine down once we've removed this bolt. So that's that. So most of that weight now is on that dolly. Hopefully the scale connecting on the other side. And just now the objective is to try and get this bolt out as one person taking the weight. There we go. Into the camera shot. As I say, normally that's either done with 2 or 3 people. So, I apologise for the little faux pas, but we got there, no damage. So I'm going to stop the video there and we'll catch up soon.